Welcome to my channel. Enjoy your viewing. Subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos. So, I've got this great uncle, let's call him Uncle Jack. He was always a bit eccentric, but that's just how he was. In our family, you never really question things like that. What made Uncle Jack stand out even more was the tattoo he had on his shoulder. It wasn't some cool design or military insignia like you'd expect, it was his full name and his social security number, inked right there on his skin. At first, it sounded like a joke when he told us about it, but as time passed, we learned there was a serious reason behind it. Turns out, Uncle Jack had the same name and birthday as another guy, someone with a pretty sketchy past. This guy had a criminal record that seemed to follow him around, and as you can imagine, that made life a bit tricky for my uncle. There was always this confusion. Cops would stop him, assuming he was the other guy, and things would get tense real quick. They'd question him, pull up his information, and get ready to haul him off until he'd whip out his social security card, which he always kept with him, just to clear things up. It worked every time, well, almost. But it wasn't always easy. I didn't think much of it growing up. It was one of those family quirks that you kind of laugh about at gatherings. But there's more to this story than just a tattoo and a mix-up. It wasn't until I was in my late teens that I got a glimpse of just how serious this mix-up could be. One afternoon, Uncle Jack was visiting us, and we decided to go out for a drive. We were heading to a local diner when, out of nowhere, we got pulled over by a cop. The officer was polite at first, asking if there was anything wrong, but then the mood shifted when he saw Uncle Jack's name on the registration. "You're Jack Thompson?" the officer asked, and I could see the instant recognition in his eyes. Uncle Jack nodded, already knowing what was coming. The officer's demeanor changed quickly. "Do you know you share a birthday with a man named Jack Thompson with a lengthy criminal record?" he asked, his hand hovering over his radio, likely running Jack's name through the system. Uncle Jack calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his social security card. "I'm not that Jack Thompson. Here's my proof." The cop didn't believe him at first. He took the card, walked back to his car, and started making calls. The minutes ticked by, and I could feel the tension rising in the air. I was nervous as hell, not knowing what was going to happen next. But Uncle Jack stayed cool, his expression never changing. Eventually, the officer returned and handed back the card, muttering something about a mix-up. He didn't apologize, just told us to be on our way. I was shaken by the whole thing. Uncle Jack, however, just shrugged it off like it was another Tuesday. "It happens," he said, as if being pulled over and interrogated by the cops was no big deal. But I could tell it wasn't just a simple mistake for him, it was part of his life now. And it was wearing on him more than I realized. This wasn't the last time, though. Far from it. The second time this happened, it was even worse. We were at a family reunion, and Uncle Jack had just gotten into town. The whole family was there, cousins, aunts, uncles, you name it. We were all hanging out in the backyard when a cop car suddenly pulled up outside. I watched as Uncle Jack's face went from relaxed to tense in the blink of an eye. He didn't even flinch when the officer stepped out and walked straight toward him. "I'm gonna need to talk to you, sir," the cop said, and I immediately felt that sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew what was coming. Uncle Jack didn't make a scene, didn't argue. He just excused himself, stepped away from the crowd, and walked toward the officer. I could see him pulling out his social security card as he went. It's like he knew this wasn't going to be an easy fix. I stayed behind, trying to act like everything was normal, but I was watching closely. The officer was questioning him, running his name through the system, and after a few minutes, things got a lot more serious. The officer started calling for backup. That's when I realized this wasn't just some simple misunderstanding anymore. Uncle Jack, as calm as ever, turned to me and gave me a little nod. "Go inside and tell your mom everything's fine," he said. I had no idea what was going on, but I did what he asked. Inside, I could hear raised voices, and I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. This was beyond an innocent mistake now. After what felt like an eternity, Uncle Jack finally walked back in. His face was a little paler than usual, and there was no sign of that calm confidence he always wore. "Everything all right?" my cousin asked, but there was no answer from Uncle Jack. He just sat down, quietly, and told us, "It's been taken care of. I'm not the guy they're looking for." It wasn't just a simple mix-up anymore. It was starting to get personal for Uncle Jack, and it was beginning to wear him down. What hit me the hardest wasn't just the confusion or the close calls, it was the way Uncle Jack handled it. Like he was used to this. Like this was just his life now. And I started to realize something: this wasn't just a tattoo story anymore. There was something bigger at play here. After the second incident, something shifted in me. I had always seen the tattoo as a quirky family thing, almost like a strange family legend, but now I realized how much it weighed on Uncle Jack. That tattoo, his name and social security number, wasn't just some odd choice he made one day. It was his lifeline. Every time he was stopped, questioned, or almost arrested, that tattoo was his proof that he wasn't someone else. But with each close call, I could see him getting more frustrated, more exhausted by it. It wasn't just about the inconvenience anymore, it was the emotional toll it was taking on him. Every encounter with the cops made it clear that this wasn't something that could just be solved with a quick show of ID or a social security card. This was a constant battle to prove that he wasn't guilty by association, and it was wearing him down. One night, we were sitting together, just talking, and I couldn't help but ask him about it. "Uncle Jack, how do you deal with all this? The cops stopping you, the mix-ups, doesn't it get to you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He didn't look at me right away. He was staring at his hands, fiddling with a napkin on the table. I could tell he was thinking about it, trying to find the right words. Then he finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "It's like I'm always on the edge of something, you know? Like I'm about to lose everything just because of a name I didn't choose. A birthday I didn't pick. But this tattoo, it's the only thing that keeps me from being dragged into a mess I didn't create. It's not just ink. It's survival." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just a quirky family thing. It was survival. And that realization changed the way I saw him. The Uncle Jack I knew, the one who always seemed in control, was cracking under the pressure of this constant battle for his identity. I couldn't help but feel guilty for never truly understanding how much it affected him. The tattoo had been a solution, but it wasn't the perfect fix, it was just the best he could do. And that's what hurt the most. The thought that something as simple as a name could create such chaos in his life, it was heartbreaking. But there was no turning back now. The tattoo had become part of him, just like the name he couldn't escape. Not long after that conversation, things took a turn for the worse. One afternoon, Uncle Jack went out for a walk to clear his head. He'd been under a lot of stress lately, and I think he was hoping the quiet of the neighborhood would help him unwind. But it didn't take long before the peace was shattered. The same thing happened again. A cop car rolled up beside him, and before Uncle Jack even had time to react, the officer was asking for his ID. He was already used to it by now, but something felt off this time. There was no friendly greeting, no small talk, it was all business. The officer looked at him with suspicion, then started running his name through the system. Uncle Jack, as calm as ever, handed over his ID, but this time, the officer seemed more impatient, more determined. "Are you sure you're not the other Jack Thompson?" the officer asked, his voice cold. Uncle Jack pulled out his social security card right away, but the officer wasn't having it. "You're telling me you've never been to jail?" the cop asked, eyes narrowing. Uncle Jack froze. For a split second, I saw that old unease flash across his face. This wasn't the usual misunderstanding. The officer was digging in, pressing harder, as though he already had his mind made up. I was a few blocks away when I got the call from Uncle Jack. He didn't even say hello, just, "Get here now. I need you." I rushed over, my heart pounding. When I arrived, I saw him standing there, his hands on his hips, facing off with the cop. The officer was still questioning him, but it was obvious Uncle Jack was losing patience. "I'm not the guy you think I am," he said firmly. "I've told you this before. I'm not him. Check my records." It wasn't until the officer finally made the call to his superior that things started to calm down. I could hear the officer talking on the radio, and after what felt like forever, he finally gave Uncle Jack a grudging nod and said, "You're free to go." But Uncle Jack wasn't free, not really. That moment, that confrontation, was a breaking point. The officer hadn't apologized, hadn't even offered a polite word. Instead, Uncle Jack just stood there, looking tired and worn out. He didn't say much as we walked back home. He didn't need to. We both knew what this meant. This wasn't just about a mistake anymore, it was about a system that saw him as guilty the moment he shared a name with someone else. I started to see the cracks. Uncle Jack wasn't as invincible as he made himself out to be. The tattoo, the card, the explanations, it was all starting to fall apart. The reality of living with a name you didn't choose was sinking in. And the worst part was, there was nothing he could do to change it. He was trapped in this cycle. I'll never forget the way Uncle Jack looked that day, walking silently beside me, his shoulders slumped a little more than usual. There was a heaviness in the air that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the exhaustion from the encounter with the cop. No, it was something deeper. Something that had been building up over the years. And for the first time, I saw just how much it had worn him down. When we got back to the house, Uncle Jack went straight to his room. He didn't even join the family for dinner, which was completely out of character for him. Usually, he was the life of the party, cracking jokes, making everyone laugh. But that day, he just disappeared into his room without saying a word. I went up to check on him later that night. I knocked softly on his door, and after a moment, he called for me to come in. I opened the door, and there he was, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. The usual confident spark in his eyes was gone. I could see the weight of everything that had happened, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about a tattoo anymore. It wasn't even about the mix-ups with the cops. It was about the emotional toll this entire situation had taken on him. "Uncle Jack," I started, unsure of what to say. "You okay?" He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw him really let down his guard. "I don't know anymore," he admitted quietly. "It's like I'm always fighting just to be seen as myself. Every time I try to live my life, it's like the past is dragging me back. I don't even know who I am half the time, just this guy with a tattoo, a name that's not even mine, stuck in a loop I can't escape from." His voice cracked, and I could tell how much it hurt to say those words. He had always been the strong one in our family, the one who everyone turned to for support. But now, I realized just how much he'd been carrying all these years without showing it. It wasn't just the cops or the confusion anymore, it was the constant emotional weight of living with someone else's past hanging over him. It broke my heart to see him like this. The man who had always been larger than life, the man who had gotten out of every tight spot with a smile and a joke, was crumbling before my eyes. And there was nothing I could do to fix it. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every time it happens, I feel like I'm losing a little piece of myself." I didn't have an answer for him. All I could do was sit there, silently, and feel the weight of his words. Because I knew that no matter how many times he showed his ID or flashed his social security card, this was never going to go away. Uncle Jack was stuck. And so was everyone who loved him. A few weeks later, things took a turn that no one saw coming. It wasn't just the confusion with the cops anymore. It wasn't just the tattoo or the mix-ups, it was something deeper, something that came to a head during a regular family gathering. We were all sitting in the living room, talking about everything and nothing, when the doorbell rang. Uncle Jack was on the couch, sipping his drink, and didn't even seem to notice at first. But when my aunt went to answer the door, things shifted. She returned with a police officer in tow. "Jack Thompson," the officer called out, and just like that, the tension in the room shot through the roof. I could see Uncle Jack tense up immediately. He was ready for the routine, the questions, the confusion, the standard "I'm not that guy" explanation. But this time, it didn't go like the others. The officer was different. This wasn't some friendly exchange anymore. This officer wasn't buying the story. He was convinced Uncle Jack was the guy they were looking for. And things escalated fast. "You're under arrest for suspicion of identity theft," the officer said, his voice firm. Everything stopped. Time seemed to freeze for a second as the words sank in. My uncle's face drained of color. He didn't move. He didn't speak. I could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what was coming, but this was different. It wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was serious. "I'm not that guy," Uncle Jack said, his voice a little shaky, but still trying to hold on to his usual calm demeanor. But the officer didn't listen. "We'll sort it out at the station," he said coldly, not even giving Uncle Jack a chance to explain further. The room was dead silent. Everyone was frozen in shock. It felt like the walls were closing in around us. My uncle, who had always been the one to hold it all together, was suddenly being treated like a criminal. His worst nightmare was happening right in front of him. And it wasn't just about a case of mistaken identity anymore. It wasn't about the tattoo, the name, the past. It was about something far darker, a system that didn't care about the truth, that didn't see him as an individual, but as just another Jack Thompson. I watched as Uncle Jack was led out of the house in cuffs, and all I could think was, how had it come to this? How had something that seemed like a simple mistake turned into a nightmare for him? It hit me harder than I thought it would. This was the breaking point. It wasn't just about being misunderstood, it was about being invisible, ignored, and even punished for something that wasn't his fault. And watching him walk out of the house like that, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and growing frustration. Uncle Jack was in custody, and the family was scrambling to figure out how to fix this. There was no longer any question that the situation had gone beyond simple confusion. This wasn't just a case of a mistaken identity anymore, it was a full-blown mess, and it was tearing our family apart. I spent hours on the phone with lawyers, trying to figure out what went wrong. Every time I spoke to someone, they seemed to promise that they'd resolve it, but the reality was different. Every time I mentioned the tattoo or the social security card, they looked at me like I was speaking another language. I didn't get it. How could something so simple, the fact that Uncle Jack had proof he wasn't the guy they were looking for, be overlooked like this? I went to visit him in jail a couple of days later. Seeing him behind bars, wearing that orange jumpsuit, was a punch to the gut. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room when I saw him there, his hands cuffed to the table. He looked nothing like the man I knew. His usual confidence was gone, replaced with exhaustion and a palpable sense of helplessness. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice hoarse. "You've gotta believe me." "I do believe you," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "But it's not just about belief anymore, Uncle Jack. It's about proving it." He shook his head, looking defeated. "I've spent my whole life trying to stay out of trouble. I've tried to make things right, but it's like it doesn't matter. No one cares that I'm innocent. They don't care that I've been trying to live a normal life. All they see is a name, a number, and a mistake I didn't make." I didn't have an answer for him. What could I say? How could I explain to him that the system, the law, didn't care about the truth when it was so focused on its own agenda? That this wasn't just about him being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, it was about a broken system that had already written him off the moment he got that tattoo. As I sat there with him, I saw the man I had always looked up to, now reduced to this shell of frustration and despair. The emotional toll of this situation had reached its peak. It wasn't just about a fight for his innocence anymore, it was about a fight for his dignity, his identity, and his future. And it was clear to me now that Uncle Jack wasn't just trying to clear his name. He was trying to prove that he was more than just a mistake. That he was more than just a name on a piece of paper. But as much as I wanted to help him, I was starting to feel the weight of his battle on my shoulders too. This wasn't just his fight anymore, it had become mine as well. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't help but feel like we were both losing. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get worse, a small crack in the situation appeared, a sliver of hope that I wasn't sure would come. After days of digging into the legal process, the lawyers finally came through with some good news. There was a chance to prove that Uncle Jack wasn't the criminal they were looking for, and it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a simple fix, but at least there was a way forward. They'd managed to track down records proving that the other Jack Thompson, the Jack Thompson who had the criminal background, wasn't even in the area when the accusations against Uncle Jack were supposedly happening. It wasn't much, but it was something. The system was starting to notice the discrepancy. The confusion about the name and birthday was still there, but the timeline didn't line up for Uncle Jack to be the person they had in mind. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I saw a flicker of hope in Uncle Jack's eyes when I visited him again. He'd been through so much, but this news, it gave him something to hold on to. A thread to cling to. I remember walking into the jail and seeing him sitting there, a little straighter than before, his eyes a little clearer. The relief in his face made my heart ache, but at the same time, it was a reminder of how much he had endured. "They found something," I said, barely able to keep my excitement in check. "They're looking at the records. The other Jack, he wasn't even in the area when they say you were. They've got a lead, Uncle Jack." His face softened, and for a moment, he looked almost like his old self. He let out a slow breath, as if he had been holding it in for days. "Are you serious?" "Yeah, I am," I replied. "It's not over yet, but we're getting closer." He nodded slowly, still processing the news. I could see the relief in his eyes, but it wasn't just about the potential for his release anymore. It was the fact that for the first time in what felt like ages, someone was actually listening, actually looking into the truth. It wasn't just about the tattoo, the name, or the number anymore. It was about clearing his name, finally. "You don't know how much this means," he said quietly, staring at the table between us. I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say to someone who's been fighting a battle for years, only to find a sliver of hope just when they've almost given up? I knew it wasn't over yet. There was still a long road ahead. But it was a start, a glimmer of hope in the middle of a storm that had felt endless. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things would work out for Uncle Jack. The weight was still there, but now it was a little lighter. We had something to fight for, something to hold on to. And that was more than we had a week ago. Even with the new lead, things weren't exactly smooth sailing. The legal system moves at its own pace, slow and methodical, regardless of the urgency of the situation. The lawyers continued to press forward, trying to secure a way to clear Uncle Jack's name, but with every day that passed, the toll it took on him grew heavier. I visited him almost every day. At first, he was hopeful, energized by the new developments. But the longer it dragged on, the more that hope began to fade into something more like exhaustion. I could see it in his face. He wasn't just tired of the legal battle. He was tired of fighting for a life that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. One afternoon, as I sat with him in the visiting room, he looked at me with a weary smile and said, "I don't know how much longer I can do this. All this, waiting. I feel like I'm stuck in a loop that never ends." I understood exactly what he meant. There were no guarantees. Even with the evidence, even with the lawyer's assurances, there was still that lingering doubt in the back of our minds. What if it wasn't enough? What if they still didn't believe him? What if, after all of this, the system still didn't care? It was a terrifying thought, one that kept me up at night. I could see how this was affecting him. It wasn't just the physical toll, it was the emotional weight. Uncle Jack had spent his life trying to avoid the mistakes of his past, trying to stay out of trouble. But now, all of those efforts seemed meaningless in the face of an identity that wasn't his. He wasn't being judged for who he was. He was being judged for someone he wasn't. "I can't keep fighting like this," he said again, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't even know who I am anymore. This guy I'm supposed to be, this person with a criminal record, I don't recognize him. But the world keeps treating me like I'm him. How do you fight something like that?" I didn't have an answer. What could I say? How do you tell someone who's been through so much that it'll all be okay? That things will get better? All I could do was sit there with him, silently, and remind myself that this wasn't just about the system anymore. This wasn't about proving he was innocent. This was about helping him hold on to whatever was left of himself, the man I knew, the one who had always kept his head up, no matter what. But the longer we sat in that room, the more I realized that the battle wasn't just with the police or the legal system, it was with the feeling of being invisible, of being misunderstood, of being trapped in someone else's life. And that was the hardest thing of all. Weeks passed, and the pressure continued to mount. Uncle Jack's mood fluctuated. Some days, he was almost optimistic, the hope that the legal team could work things out still driving him. But on others, the hopelessness took over, and it was hard to keep the faith myself. We were all living in limbo, just waiting for some sign that things were going to turn around. Then, finally, a breakthrough of sorts. The lawyers managed to get a hold of a key piece of evidence. The real Jack Thompson, the one with the criminal background, had been in prison during the time when some of the charges in question had occurred. They pulled up records, timelines, and even witness statements that seemed to line up with Uncle Jack's claim that he was being mistaken for someone else. It wasn't enough to get him released yet, but it was progress. It was proof that he was telling the truth, that the whole thing was based on a clerical error, a coincidence of names, dates, and locations. It wasn't much, but it was the first time anyone had taken his story seriously. When I saw Uncle Jack that day, I could tell he was trying not to get too excited, but I could also see the relief in his eyes. It was the smallest shift, but it made all the difference. The man who had been beaten down by the system, by confusion, by endless legal battles, was now starting to believe that he could actually get out of this. "They're looking at the records now," I said to him, trying to keep my tone even. "They've got the proof that you weren't in the area when they said you were. This guy, the real Jack Thompson, he was locked up at the time." He blinked at me for a moment, processing the news. Then, for the first time in weeks, I saw a real, genuine smile spread across his face. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The burden lifted off his shoulders just a little, and for the first time in so long, I saw a spark of the man I remembered, the one who fought for what was right, who never backed down, who always had a joke in his back pocket. Maybe this nightmare's finally coming to an end," he said softly, almost to himself. It wasn't a guarantee. Nothing was. But it was a glimmer of hope, something to hold on to. The lawyers were still working through the details, but this time, the evidence was on his side. For once, the system was on his side, too. But even as he let himself feel that moment of relief, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He'd been through hell. And while this small victory was a step in the right direction, I knew it wouldn't be enough to erase the emotional toll this whole ordeal had taken on him. The scars were there, deep down, and no amount of legal victories could heal those wounds. Still, for now, it was a start. A real, tangible start toward freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Uncle Jack would get out of this mess. The breakthrough felt like a breath of fresh air, but it came with its own set of challenges. Now that the lawyers had solid proof that Uncle Jack wasn't the criminal they thought he was, the legal team was moving forward, but slowly. It felt like the system, though it had finally acknowledged the error, was still dragging its feet. There was still paperwork to fill out, hoops to jump through, and more waiting. It was like the last hurdle, the one that would finally clear his name, was still miles away. But despite all the frustrations, despite the slow pace of justice, Uncle Jack seemed lighter. The weight of uncertainty had been lifted a little. The fear of being stuck in the system for something he didn't do wasn't as heavy as it had been. The man I saw across from me during our visits was starting to come back, slowly, like a flower blooming after a long winter. One afternoon, when I went to visit, I found him sitting up straighter than usual, with an almost childlike excitement in his eyes. He was flipping through some paperwork the lawyers had sent him. It was like he was getting ready for a new chapter in his life. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down the papers. "When I get out of here, I want to go on a damn vacation. I want to just go somewhere, anywhere. You know, take a break from all this. It feels like I've been stuck in this fight forever." I couldn't help but laugh. "I think that's a good idea. You've earned it." He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, maybe the Bahamas or something. Something warm. Just me, a hammock, and a drink with an umbrella in it." It was the first time in ages that I saw him talk about something beyond the mess he was in. And for a brief moment, it felt like we were just two regular people again, talking about something normal. It was the first step in healing, I think, shifting from getting out of this nightmare to actually thinking about the future. Still, the journey wasn't over. I kept telling myself to stay grounded. The fight wasn't won yet. But the first steps were there. The hope was there. And even though we were both wary of getting too excited, it was impossible not to let some optimism creep in. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like we were on a never-ending treadmill of frustration and disappointment. The wheels of justice were turning, albeit slowly. But they were turning. And that was enough. As I left that day, I thought about Uncle Jack's words. A vacation. Something simple, something he'd dreamed of, but hadn't been able to do. I knew we had a long way to go before we'd get to that point, but in my heart, I felt like this might be the first real step toward freedom for him and for all of us. The slow pace of the legal process continued, but something unexpected happened along the way that changed everything. A tip, an anonymous call to the lawyer's office, came in one afternoon that completely shifted the trajectory of Uncle Jack's case. It wasn't anything that anyone had been expecting, but it was exactly what we needed to push the case over the edge. The caller had been involved in the same case years ago and knew details that hadn't come to light yet. This person claimed that they had witnessed the real Jack Thompson in action during the time in question and had been following the case from the beginning. They told us where we could find more corroborating evidence, and it was a key moment that forced the legal team to shift into high gear. The news hit us like a thunderclap. The evidence they'd uncovered wasn't just new, it was concrete. It wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was proof. Proof that Jack Thompson, the one who had been wrongfully accused, was, in fact, innocent. I could barely breathe when I got the call from the lawyer. "This is it," they said. "We've got the proof. We've got everything we need to make this right." I rushed to the jail to tell Uncle Jack. When I walked in, I saw the same tired, worn face, but there was something different in his eyes. Something that wasn't there before. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was disbelief. "I got a call," I said, barely holding it together. "They found more evidence. The kind we needed. It's over, Uncle Jack. We have everything we need." For a moment, he didn't react. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, a tear slid down his cheek, and I knew that he was trying to hold back a flood of emotions. Years of fear, of frustration, of not knowing when or if he would ever get out. All of it was starting to crumble now. I can't believe it," he whispered. "Is it really over?" I nodded. "It's over. We're not done yet, but we're so close. This is it." The weight that had been on both of us for so long seemed to lift in that moment, but it wasn't an immediate fix. There were still court dates to attend, still paperwork to sign, still the final hurdle of walking out of that prison, but for the first time in ages, Uncle Jack allowed himself to let go. The battle wasn't over, but we were finally on the winning side. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I saw him smile again, not the tired, worn-out smile of a man who had been defeated, but a smile full of relief. A smile that was, for once, free of the weight of the past few years. It was a smile of someone who had been fighting for so long, and finally, felt like the fight might be over. "I can't wait to go to the Bahamas," he said, his voice cracking just a little. "I really can't." I laughed, feeling the tension in my chest finally begin to loosen. "I think you've earned it, Uncle Jack." And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about reclaiming his life. And that made all the difference. Tavaja Slova. Next. ChatGPT Povdal. Part 14, The Final Day. The day Uncle Jack was officially cleared felt like a victory, but it wasn't as glamorous as I had imagined it would be. It wasn't like some triumphant courtroom scene in a movie. There were no standing ovations or dramatic speeches. No, it was quiet. Almost anticlimactic. The lawyer called us one last time, confirming that all the final pieces had fallen into place. Uncle Jack's name was cleared, his record expunged. The wrongful charges were officially dropped. The legal nightmare that had plagued him for years was finally over. The judge signed off on the case, and just like that, he was free. I was at the prison that day, watching him walk out for the last time. The door opened, and there he stood, in the same clothes he'd been wearing when he was first arrested, but this time, there was something different. He wasn't the same man who had walked in all those years ago, beaten down and defeated by the system. This time, he stood a little taller, his shoulders a little less slumped, the weight of the world finally gone from his back. I met him outside, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, in the cool air, looking at each other like we were both trying to process what had just happened. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. It was the silence of relief. Uncle Jack finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I don't know what to say, kid. I don't know how to feel about all this. It feels so damn surreal." "I know," I said, my throat tight. "But it's real. It's over." We stood there for a little while longer, both of us taking it in, as if we were afraid that if we spoke too soon, the moment would slip away. I could tell Uncle Jack was still processing everything. It had been such a long, hard road. But I also knew that, deep down, he was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Eventually, I put my arm around his shoulder. "You're free now. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Hell, we can start planning that vacation to the Bahamas if you want." He chuckled softly, the sound almost foreign after all this time. "You know what? I think I'm ready for that. Let's do it. Let's go somewhere and leave all of this behind." And just like that, the dream of freedom felt real again. Not just the physical freedom of being released from prison, but the emotional freedom of being able to look forward to something. To feel like the future wasn't some far-off idea but something tangible that they could reach for. As we drove away from the prison that day, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we'd been through. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about restoring his dignity, his sense of self. The years he'd lost, the dreams that had been deferred, the anger and pain he'd endured, they hadn't gone away, but they had been acknowledged. They had been validated. And as we headed down the highway, the sun starting to dip below the horizon, I finally let myself believe that everything was going to be okay. Uncle Jack had his life back. And, in a way, I had mine too. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were scars, there were wounds, but they didn't define us anymore. We were moving forward. Together. And in that moment, I knew I'd never take freedom for granted again. Looking back on everything, I can say one thing with certainty: the system isn't perfect. Sometimes, it takes years for the truth to come to light, and in the process, it can tear people apart. I saw that firsthand. But I also saw that, in the end, the truth does matter. It may take time, it may take a hell of a lot of patience and perseverance, but the truth has a way of winning out eventually. I learned a lot about myself, about Uncle Jack, and about the power of resilience. But I also learned about the importance of not letting things slide. You can't just assume that everything will work itself out, especially when it comes to something as important as your identity. You have to fight for it, even when it feels like no one's listening. Even when you're tired, even when you feel like the world is against you, you have to keep fighting. If there's one piece of advice I can give anyone in a similar situation, it's this: never give up. Even when things seem hopeless. Even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. The truth is powerful, and it's worth fighting for. And even though the fight can be long and painful, in the end, it's worth it. Uncle Jack got his life back, but he also got something even more important: peace of mind. And that's something no one can ever take away from him again. So, to anyone going through something similar, remember this: no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard the fight, keep pushing. The truth will set you free.